The Psychology of Millionaire Mindset. Think like the wealthy. The psychology that creates millionaires is actually considered a mental disorder by most therapists. I'm not kidding. The relentless obsession with systems over emotions, the ability to disconnect from immediate gratification, while others around you think you've lost your mind. The paranoid-level pattern recognition that sees opportunities in every problem. The willingness to be hated, misunderstood, and called crazy for years before anyone calls you successful. Psychological research consistently shows that their thinking patterns mirror what therapists label as maladaptive behaviors. They're never satisfied. They see problems everywhere. They trust no one completely. They assume everything will go wrong and prepare accordingly. Most people would call this anxiety disorder. Millionaires call it Tuesday. Here's what decades of psychological research reveal about self-made millionaires. They don't think like normal people. They can't. Normal thinking creates normal results. Normal thinking keeps you broke, comfortable, and dreaming about someday. Study after study shows that millionaires didn't overcome their psychological quirks. They weaponized them. In this book, you're going to learn the exact mental operating systems documented in the most successful self-made millionaires. Not the sanitized, feel-good version you've heard before. The raw, uncomfortable, controversial psychology found in every billionaire biography and psychological profile. You'll discover why being mentally healthy, according to society's standards, might be keeping you poor. Why the very traits that make therapists concerned are the same traits that build empires. This isn't about positive thinking or vision boards. This is about rewiring your brain to see what millionaires see, think how millionaires think, and most importantly, act how millionaires act when no one is watching. Your transformation starts with accepting one disturbing truth. You might need to become a little crazy to become truly wealthy. Are you ready? Chapter 1, From Food Stamps to Forbes. The Oprah Algorithm. How Trauma Becomes Wealth. Here's something that will disturb you. Oprah Winfrey's greatest asset wasn't her talent, her charisma, or her work ethic. It was her trauma. Every abuse, every rejection, every moment of poverty became psychological fuel for an empire worth billions. The same experiences that would break most people became her competitive advantage. Most self-help gurus won't tell you this because it sounds too harsh, but millionaire psychology doesn't care about your feelings. January 29th, 1954. A teenage girl gives birth in rural Mississippi. The baby is Oprah Gail Winfrey, born to an unmarried teenage mother with no money, no education, and no hope. This isn't where billionaires typically begin their stories. By age 9, Oprah had been sexually abused by multiple family members. By 14, she was pregnant herself. The baby died in infancy. At 15, she was living with her father, working at the local grocery store, sending money home to her struggling mother. Most people would call this a tragic beginning. Oprah called it psychological training. She was shuttled between her mother in Milwaukee and her grandmother in Mississippi, never belonging anywhere, always the outsider. She learned to read people's emotions to survive. She developed an obsession with communication, because words were her only weapon against chaos. She became hypervigilant about human behavior, because predicting adult moods could mean the difference between safety and violence. What psychiatrists would label as trauma responses, Oprah was unconsciously developing as business skills. At 19, while attending Tennessee State University on a scholarship she fought for, Oprah became the first African-American female news anchor at Nashville's WLAC-TV. But here's where her story gets psychologically interesting. She was terrible at traditional news. Her emotional responses to tragic stories made her colleagues cringe. Her inability to maintain professional detachment was considered a career-killing weakness. Everyone told her to suppress her emotions. She did the opposite. In 1983, she moved to Chicago to host a failing morning show called AM Chicago. The show was hemorrhaging viewers, ranked dead last in its time slot, considered unsalvageable by industry experts. Oprah had 3 months to turn it around or get fired. This is where the millionaire psychology kicked in. Instead of copying successful hosts, Oprah weaponized everything that made her different. Her traumatic childhood had taught her to connect with pain, so she made pain the centerpiece of her show. Her history of feeling like an outsider made her gravitate toward other outcasts, so she gave voice to people nobody else would interview. Her inability to maintain emotional distance became her superpower. Within 1 month, AM Chicago went from last place to first. Within a year, it was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. By 1986, it was nationally syndicated. But this wasn't luck or talent. This was the psychology of weaponized trauma creating systematic success. Here's what most people miss about Oprah's success. She didn't overcome her psychological damage. She monetized it. Every weakness became a revenue stream. Every trauma became a business strategy. The Oprah algorithm has 5 components. 1. Pain pattern recognition. Childhood abuse taught Oprah to read micro-expressions and emotional states with supernatural accuracy. This wasn't a gift. It was a survival mechanism. But she translated this hypervigilance into an ability to identify what audiences craved emotionally before they knew it themselves. 2. Outsider advantage exploitation. Never fitting in anywhere made Oprah comfortable being the only one in any room. While others sought acceptance, she learned to leverage being different. This psychological conditioning made her fearless about taking positions that isolated her from peers, but connected her with audiences. 3. Emotional authenticity as strategy. Her inability to suppress feelings wasn't weakness. It was market differentiation. In a media landscape built on artificial personalities, Oprah's genuine emotional responses created a monopoly on authentic connection. The scarcity-driven obsession. Growing up with nothing creates a specific type of hunger that never gets satisfied. Oprah's childhood poverty didn't just motivate her. It programmed her brain to see opportunity in every interaction, every conversation, every moment of airtime. Trauma bonding as business model. Her personal pain gave her access to other people's pain. This wasn't therapy. It was strategy. By sharing her struggles publicly, she created permission for others to share theirs. This vulnerability became the foundation of her media empire. Most people try to hide their psychological scars. Millionaires turn them into competitive advantages. Here's how to apply the Oprah algorithm. Step 1. Inventory your damage. List every experience that broke you. Financial struggles, family dysfunction, social rejection, professional failures. Don't romanticize them. Catalog them. Each represents a psychological skill you developed to survive. Step 2. Identify your survival skills. What did you learn to do because of your pain? Read people's intentions, work without recognition, handle rejection, survive on minimal resources. These aren't just coping mechanisms, they're business capabilities. Step 3. Find your pains market. Oprah discovered that millions of people shared her feelings of not belonging. Your psychological damage connects you to specific audiences. Who else shares your struggle? That's your market. Step 4. Weaponize your authenticity. Stop hiding what makes you different. Your wounds, your fears, your unconventional perspectives. These aren't liabilities. They're your competitive moat. No one else can replicate your specific combination of psychological conditioning. Step 5. Build systems around your obsessions. Oprah's hypervigilance became systematic audience research. Her need for connection became systematic relationship building. Your psychological compulsions can become systematic business processes. Pause and do this exercise immediately. Write down 3 experiences that broke you. For each one, identify. What psychological skill did you develop to survive it? How could this skill create value for others? Who else has experienced similar pain? Example: if childhood poverty made you obsessive about financial security, you could help others build emergency funds. If social rejection made you hyper-aware of inclusion dynamics, you could consult on company culture. Your psychological damage isn't something to overcome, it's something to leverage. Here's what makes people uncomfortable. Oprah's billions weren't built on overcoming trauma. They were built on monetizing it. She didn't heal and then succeed. She succeeded by refusing to heal in traditional ways. While therapists work to help people process their pain, Oprah helped them profit from it. While self-help experts preached about letting go, Oprah showed how to hold on strategically. This isn't about staying damaged. It's about understanding that your psychological conditioning, including the dark parts, creates unique capabilities that no amount of education or networking can replicate. Most people spend their lives trying to become normal. Millionaires spend their lives weaponizing what makes them abnormal. The question isn't whether you have psychological scars. You do. The question is whether you're going to hide them or leverage them. Oprah's story reveals the first pillar of millionaire psychology: trauma as competitive advantage. But what happens when someone with every advantage still chooses extreme discomfort? In Chapter 2, we'll examine Elon Musk sleeping in his office, showering at the YMCA, and voluntarily living like he had nothing to lose. Because sometimes the psychology that creates billions requires choosing poverty when you could afford comfort. Chapter 2, sleeping in his office. The Musk algorithm, when comfort is the enemy. Here's something that will challenge everything you think you know about success. When Elon Musk had enough money to live comfortably, he chose to live like he was broke. This wasn't poverty. It was strategic psychological conditioning. And it's the difference between entrepreneurs who get comfortable and billionaires who stay hungry. Most people work to escape discomfort. Millionaires weaponize it. 1995, Stanford University. Elon Musk has just been accepted into a PhD program in materials science, the kind of prestigious academic path that guarantees a comfortable, respectable future. He has degrees in physics and economics from the University of Pennsylvania. His father has money. His path to middle-class success is mapped out perfectly. 2 days into the program, he drops out, not because he couldn't handle the work, not because he was failing, but because Netscape had just gone public with a valuation of nearly $3 billion, and Musk realized the internet revolution was happening without him. While his classmates were settling into comfortable academic routines, Musk was choosing radical uncertainty. This is where the millionaire psychology diverges from normal thinking. Normal people optimize for comfort. Millionaires optimize for growth, even when growth requires voluntary suffering. Musk moved to Palo Alto with his brother Kimball to start Zip2, a company that would create online city guides for newspapers. This was 1995. Most people barely understood what the internet was, let alone how to make money from it. But here's where Musk's psychology gets interesting. He didn't just start a company. He systematically eliminated every comfort that might make him complacent. They rented a small office for $400 a month. Instead of also renting an apartment, they chose to live in the office. Not because they had to, because they decided to. Musk slept on a futon next to his desk. He kept his clothes in a small office closet. When he needed to shower, he walked to the local YMCA. When Zip2 launched, Musk had only $2,000 in his bank account. His father, Errol, provided $28,000 in startup capital, enough to live modestly while building the company. But instead of using that money for basic comfort, Musk kept his burn rate ridiculously tiny. They ate meals at Jack in the Box, sometimes 4 times a day because it was cheap. Their car was so unreliable that when an intern borrowed it, the wheels literally fell off. Here's what most people miss. This wasn't a romantic startup story about hustling. This was psychological programming. Musk was conditioning himself to function at peak performance under maximum discomfort. While other entrepreneurs were trying to raise money to buy nice offices and hire expensive teams, Musk was proving to himself that he could build a company with almost nothing. This wasn't about saving money. It was about building psychological resilience that would serve him for decades. The psychology behind voluntary poverty is counterintuitive, but documented. When you eliminate the option of retreat to comfort, your brain rewires to find solutions instead of excuses. Musk wasn't just building a business. He was building the mental operating system of someone who could handle billion-dollar pressure. Elon coded the Zip2 software during the night and turned the server on during the day. When the website went down, it was because he was compiling code on the same machine. He asked employees to kick him awake when they arrived in the morning so he could get back to programming. This wasn't sustainable work-life balance. It was sustainable psychological advantage. The Musk algorithm has 5 core components that explain why voluntary discomfort creates extraordinary results. 1. Comfort immunity. By choosing discomfort when comfort was available, Musk developed immunity to the psychological weakness that destroys most entrepreneurs: the desire to get comfortable after early success. When you've proven you can function without basic amenities, business setbacks become minor inconveniences. 2. Resource optimization obsession. Living on almost nothing trained Musk's brain to extract maximum value from minimum resources. This psychological pattern later allowed him to revolutionize entire industries by doing what others thought was impossible with limited capital. 3. Solution-forcing stress. Voluntary discomfort creates productive stress, the kind that forces innovation rather than paralysis. When retreat to comfort isn't an option, your brain stops looking for excuses and starts finding solutions. 4. Competitive conditioning. While competitors were optimizing for lifestyle balance, Musk was optimizing for competitive advantage. His willingness to outwork and out-sacrifice everyone else became a sustainable moat around his businesses. 5. Future state visualization. The discomfort wasn't random. It was preparation. Musk knew that building revolutionary companies would require handling massive pressure and uncertainty. He was training his psychological resilience in advance. The results speak for themselves. In 1999, Compaq bought Zip2 for $307 million. Musk personally received $22 million, enough to retire comfortably at 27. Instead, he immediately invested almost everything into his next venture, X.com, which became PayPal. Most people would have celebrated with luxury. Musk bought a McLaren F1 sports car, then promptly got back to work building the next company, knowing that comfort was the enemy of continued growth. Here's how to apply the Musk algorithm without destroying your health. Step 1. Identify your comfort dependencies. List every comfort that you believe you need to function effectively. Housing quality, food preferences, transportation standards, entertainment budgets. Most of these are psychological dependencies, not physical requirements. Step 2. Choose strategic discomfort. Pick one area where you can voluntarily reduce comfort while increasing capability. Live in a smaller space to reduce overhead. Eliminate expensive habits that don't contribute to your goals. Choose inconvenience that forces efficiency. Step 3. Resource constraint training. Artificially limit your resources to force creative solutions. Set ridiculously low budgets for projects. Work with smaller teams than you think you need. Use worse equipment than you could afford. Train your brain to do more with less. Step 4. Eliminate retreat options. Burn bridges to comfortable fallback positions. Quit jobs before you have replacement income secured. Invest so much in your venture that failure means starting over. Make success the only acceptable outcome. Step 5. Document your discomfort tolerance. Track how you function under increasing pressure and uncertainty. Note which discomforts actually impair performance versus which ones just feel unpleasant. Build evidence that you're stronger than you think. Do this exercise now. Identify one comfort you rely on that isn't truly necessary for your performance. Eliminate it for the next 30 days. Not to punish yourself, but to prove to yourself that you can function at a higher level with fewer dependencies. Example: if you think you need expensive coffee to work effectively, switch to cheap instant coffee. If you believe you need a perfect workspace, work from uncomfortable locations. If you assume you need certain amenities, eliminate them temporarily and track your actual performance. The goal isn't suffering. It's building psychological resilience that gives you sustainable competitive advantage. Here's the controversial truth that makes people uncomfortable. Comfort is often the biggest obstacle to extraordinary achievement. Not because hard work matters more than smart work, but because the psychology that accepts comfort stops looking for breakthrough solutions. Musk didn't sleep in his office because he was broke. He could have afforded better. He did it because he understood that millionaire-level success requires psychological conditioning that most people aren't willing to endure. While his competitors were optimizing for work-life balance, he was optimizing for psychological advantage. This isn't about grinding yourself into burnout. It's about understanding that voluntary discomfort, strategically applied, creates mental resilience that becomes a competitive moat. When everyone else retreats to comfort at the first sign of pressure, you keep functioning and finding solutions. The difference between entrepreneurs and billionaires isn't just about scale. It's about psychological conditioning. Most entrepreneurs work to escape discomfort. Billionaires understand that certain types of discomfort are tools for maintaining competitive edge. Musk's story reveals the second pillar of millionaire psychology: voluntary discomfort as competitive advantage. But what happens when comfort isn't even an option and failure means public humiliation? In Chapter 3, we'll examine Colonel Sanders' psychological transformation through 76 rejections and how systematic failure becomes systematic success. Because sometimes the psychology that creates fortunes requires programming yourself to function when everything feels impossible. Chapter 3. Rejected 1,009 times. The Sanders Algorithm. Programming yourself for systematic persistence. Here's something that will shatter your understanding of motivation. Colonel Harlan Sanders didn't become successful despite being rejected over 1,000 times. He became successful because of it. Each no wasn't a failure. It was data collection for a psychological algorithm that turned rejection into revenue. Most people treat rejection as evidence they should quit. Millionaires treat rejection as evidence they're getting closer. 1956, Corbin, Kentucky. At 65 years old, Harlan Sanders watches bulldozers destroy everything he's built. The new interstate highway is bypassing his restaurant, cafe, and motel, the business he spent decades perfecting. His life's work becomes worthless overnight. He's forced to auction off the property for $75,000 to pay his debts, a fraction of what it was worth just months before. He's officially broke. His only income is a $105 monthly Social Security check. This is where most people accept defeat. This is where Sanders' psychology diverged from normal thinking forever. Instead of seeing this as the end, Sanders saw it as data. He knew how to cook chicken better than anyone else in the country. He had perfected a pressure frying technique that cooked chicken in 10 minutes instead of 30, while keeping it juicy and flavorful. He had developed a secret blend of 11 herbs and spices that people couldn't stop talking about. The problem wasn't his product, the problem was distribution. Sanders made a decision that reveals the core of millionaire psychology. Instead of accepting limitations, he chose to systemically eliminate them. He loaded his 1946 Ford with pressure cookers, spices, and samples. At 65, when most people were settling into retirement, Sanders embarked on the most ambitious sales campaign in restaurant history. He drove across the country, sleeping in his car, visiting restaurants one by one. His strategy was simple but psychologically brilliant. Cook his chicken recipe on the spot for restaurant owners. If they liked it, they could pay him a nickel for every piece of chicken they sold using his recipe and technique. Here's where the psychology gets fascinating. Sanders didn't just face rejection, he weaponized it. Restaurant after restaurant turned him down. The 1,009 rejections number that's become legendary in business folklore represents something more important than perseverance. It represents systematic desensitization to the psychological pain that stops most people from continuing. Each no taught Sanders something valuable. Some restaurants didn't like the pressure frying method. Others questioned whether customers would pay extra for premium chicken. Some owners didn't want to deal with franchising complications. Sanders collected this feedback and refined his pitch, his product, and his business model. The Sanders algorithm has 5 psychological components that explain how rejection becomes competitive advantage. 1. Rejection desensitization. By systematically exposing himself to rejection, Sanders built immunity to the emotional impact that paralyzes most entrepreneurs. After hearing no hundreds of times, it became background noise rather than personal failure. This psychological conditioning allowed him to function at peak performance in high rejection environments. 2. Data-driven iteration. Sanders treated every rejection as market research. Instead of taking no personally, he analyzed why people said no and adjusted his approach. This converted emotional experiences into actionable intelligence, creating a learning loop that improved his success rate over time. D. Probability-based persistence. Sanders understood that franchise sales was a numbers game. If 1 in 50 restaurants said yes, he needed to visit 500 restaurants to get 10 franchises. This mathematical approach removed emotion from persistence and made success inevitable rather than hopeful. 4. Compound proof building. Early rejections built psychological evidence that his eventual success wasn't luck. It was earned. When restaurants finally started saying yes, Sanders had unshakable confidence because he knew exactly how much work it required. This prevented imposter syndrome and decision paralysis. 5. Scarcity-driven value creation. The difficulty of securing franchises made them more valuable to Sanders and more compelling to restaurant owners. His willingness to endure massive rejection signaled that his recipe was worth the effort, creating perceived value through demonstrated commitment. The breakthrough came when Pete Harmon, a restaurant owner in Salt Lake City, tasted Sanders' chicken and immediately wanted to partner with him. Harmon became the first official Kentucky Fried Chicken franchisee in 1952. The chicken was so popular that customers would drive hours just to try it. Word spread. More restaurants wanted the recipe. Sanders had created a systematic process for converting rejection into acceptance. Perfect the product, refine the pitch, visit enough prospects, measure results, and iterate. By 1964, Sanders had 600 franchises across the United States and Canada. At 73 years old, he sold Kentucky Fried Chicken Corporation for $2 million, approximately $20 million in today's money. The man who started franchising with nothing but a $105 Social Security check had built a global empire by systematically programming himself to function through rejection. Here's how to apply the Sanders algorithm without destroying your mental health. Step 1. Reframe rejection as data collection. Stop treating no as personal judgment and start treating it as market research. Create a simple tracking system. Record every rejection, the reason given, and what you learned. This converts emotional experiences into actionable intelligence. Step 2. Establish your rejection quotas. Set daily or weekly rejection targets. If you need 10 yes responses and your conversion rate is 5%, you need 200 contacts. Make rejection a goal, not an accident. When you hit your rejection quota, you're making progress toward success. Step 3. Build systematic desensitization. Start with low-stakes rejections to build tolerance. Ask for small favors, negotiate minor discounts, or request meetings with less important prospects. Gradually increase the stakes as your rejection immunity develops. Step 4. Create iteration protocols. After every 10 to 20 rejections, analyze patterns and adjust your approach. Are people rejecting your price, your timing, your presentation, or your product? Use rejection data to improve your offer systematically. Step 5. Document your progress. Track your improvement over time. Note how your conversion rate changes, how your emotional response to rejection diminishes, and how your confidence increases. Build evidence that the system works to maintain motivation during difficult periods. Try this exercise immediately. Identify something you want but haven't asked for because you fear rejection. A raise, a date, a business partnership, a speaking opportunity. Ask for it today. When you get rejected, and you might, document exactly why and what you learned. Then ask someone else tomorrow. Example: if you want to freelance but haven't reached out to potential clients, send 5 cold emails today. Don't focus on getting hired. Focus on collecting rejection data. What objections do people have? What questions do they ask? Use this information to improve your next 5 emails. The goal isn't to avoid rejection. It's to make rejection useful. Here's the controversial truth that makes people uncomfortable. Most successful people aren't more talented or lucky than failures. They're just more systematically persistent. They've programmed themselves to function through rejection cycles that stop other people. Sanders wasn't exceptional because he had a great chicken recipe. Lots of people have great recipes. He was exceptional because he systematically eliminated the psychological barriers that prevent most people from scaling their ideas. While his competitors gave up after a few rejections, Sanders had built psychological immunity, to the emotional pain that causes most people to quit. This isn't about developing thick skin or ignoring feedback. It's about understanding that rejection is often about timing, fit, or circumstances, rather than personal worth or idea quality. Sanders knew his chicken was excellent because he had years of customer validation. The rejections weren't about his product. They were about finding the right partners at the right time. The difference between entrepreneurs who succeed and those who fail often comes down to rejection tolerance. Most people treat their first few no responses as market validation that they should quit. Successful people treat early rejections as proof they need to refine their approach and expand their sample size. Sanders' story reveals the third pillar of millionaire psychology: systematic persistence through strategic rejection tolerance. But what happens when you need to build something that requires impossible resources and expertise you don't have? Chapter 4 will examine how broke innovators create billion-dollar solutions by turning limitations into advantages. Because sometimes the psychology that creates fortunes requires building the impossible with resources you don't possess. Chapter 4: The Dishwasher's Algorithm. The comb method, turning impossible limitations into competitive advantages. Here's something that will challenge everything you believe about resource requirements. John Combe built one of the world's most valuable communication platforms using stolen library time and returned bookstore manuals. He didn't overcome his resource limitations. He weaponized them into a $19 billion advantage. Most people think you need resources to build something valuable. Millionaires understand that artificial scarcity often creates better solutions than unlimited budgets. 1976. A small village outside Kyiv, Ukraine. Jan Koum is born into a Jewish family under Soviet surveillance. His home has no hot water. His parents whisper during phone conversations, knowing the government is likely listening. At 16, he and his mother immigrate to Mountain View, California, the future home of Google, carrying almost nothing. They settle into government housing and survive on food stamps. His mother works as a babysitter and cleaner. Koum takes a job as a janitor at a grocery store, sweeping floors and emptying trash. They can't afford international calls back to Ukraine. They can't afford computer equipment. They can't afford programming courses. Most people would see these as insurmountable barriers to tech success. Koum saw them as design constraints that would force him to build something better. Unable to afford computer books, Koum developed what became known as his bookstore algorithm. He would buy programming manuals, study them intensively for hours, memorize key concepts, then return them for full refunds. This wasn't theft. It was systematic knowledge acquisition under resource constraints. Think about the psychological training this created. Koum learned to absorb and retain information at accelerated rates because he had limited time with each resource. He developed photographic reading skills. He trained his brain to identify core concepts quickly and discard unnecessary information. These weren't just study habits. They were cognitive advantages that unlimited resources couldn't replicate. By 18, Koum had taught himself enough programming to enroll at San Jose State University, while working at Ernst & Young as a security tester. But the real breakthrough came when he joined Yahoo in 1997, where he met Brian Acton, his future co-founder, and the person who would help him turn resource limitations into systematic advantages. At Yahoo, Koum experienced the psychological frustration that drives true innovation, working for a company with unlimited resources but limited vision. He watched talented engineers build products that prioritized advertising revenue over user experience. He saw how abundant resources led to bloated features and compromised design decisions. In 2007, both Koum and Acton quit Yahoo, frustrated with corporate limitations. They spent a year traveling, playing ultimate frisbee, and applying for jobs at companies like Facebook, applications that were rejected. This rejection wasn't failure. It was redirection toward building something better than what already existed. The WhatsApp breakthrough came when Koum bought an iPhone in January 2009 and recognized the potential of the nascent App Store. But his approach revealed the psychology that transforms limitations into competitive advantages. Instead of building what was possible with unlimited resources, He built what was necessary with minimal resources. The Coombe algorithm has 5 psychological components that explain how artificial scarcity creates superior solutions. During constraint-driven innovation, limited resources force focus on essential features. While competitors built messaging apps with dozens of features, Coombe built one that did one thing perfectly: send messages reliably. The resource limitation eliminated feature bloat and created elegant simplicity. User-centric prioritization. When you can't afford to build everything, you must build what users actually need. Coombe's early poverty taught him to distinguish between wants and needs. WhatsApp focused on core functionality rather than flashy features that drained battery or confused users. 3. Efficiency obsession. Resource constraints create psychological obsessions with efficiency. WhatsApp was built to use minimal data, work on older phones, and function reliably in poor network conditions. Advantages that wealthy competitors with unlimited resources couldn't replicate because they hadn't been forced to optimize. 4. Anti-pattern recognition. Experiencing surveillance in Ukraine and poverty in America taught Coombe what he didn't want to build: products that exploited users or invaded privacy. His limitations created clear principles that guided every design decision. 5. Systematic resourcefulness. Years of maximizing minimal resources created mental habits of finding creative solutions. When WhatsApp needed funding, they raised exactly what was necessary. When they needed features, they built exactly what was essential. This discipline prevented the waste that destroys many well-funded startups. WhatsApp launched in May 2009 and initially flopped. Most entrepreneurs would have added features or raised more money. Coombe waited for Apple to introduce push notifications in June, then rebuilt the app around this single technological change. This patience and strategic restraint came directly from years of operating with resource limitations. The results speak to the power of constraint-driven innovation. By 2014, WhatsApp had 450 million users with only 55 employees. The app generated billions in value, while maintaining the simple elegance that resource limitations had forced Coombe to perfect. Facebook acquired WhatsApp for $19 billion, one of the largest tech acquisitions in history. Coombe signed the deal at the same welfare office where he had once stood in line for food stamps with his mother. The symbolism wasn't accidental. The building represented the resource limitations that had shaped his approach to building something extraordinary. Here's how to apply the Coombe algorithm to transform your resource limitations into competitive advantages. Step 1. Identify your resource constraints. List every resource you lack: money, time, connections, skills, equipment, space. Instead of treating these as problems to solve, treat them as design parameters that will force you to build something better. Step 2. Convert limitations into requirements. For each constraint, define how it must improve your solution. Limited budget requires focusing on essential features. Limited time requires building only what users actually need. Limited connections require creating something so valuable it spreads organically. Step 3. Build your learning infrastructure. Like Coombe's bookstore algorithm, create systematic methods for acquiring knowledge without traditional resources. Use library resources, free online courses, returned purchases, borrowed equipment, shared workspaces, or skill trades. Step 4. Embrace single-feature excellence. Choose one thing to do perfectly, rather than many things adequately. Resource constraints should force you to identify the core value proposition and eliminate everything else. Step 5. Document your efficiency discoveries. Track every efficiency you develop due to resource limitations. These become competitive advantages that well-funded competitors can't replicate because they've never been forced to find these solutions. Try this exercise immediately. Identify one area where you've been waiting for more resources before starting. Instead of acquiring resources, redesign your approach to work within current constraints. What would you build if you had to create maximum value with minimum resources? Example: if you want to start a business but lack capital, design a service business that requires only skills and time. If you want to learn programming but can't afford courses, create a systematic plan using free resources and measured progress goals. The constraint becomes the competitive advantage. Here's the controversial truth that makes people uncomfortable. Abundant resources often produce inferior solutions. When money, time, and options are unlimited, there's no pressure to optimize, innovate, or focus on what truly matters. Kaum's poverty forced him to build WhatsApp as efficiently as possible. Well-funded competitors built messaging apps with advertising, social features, games, and unnecessary complexity. WhatsApp's resource limitations created a purity of purpose that became its primary competitive advantage. The companies that disrupted established industries, Uber, Airbnb, Instagram, weren't built with the largest budgets or most resources. They were built by people who used creative constraints to solve problems differently than resource-rich competitors. Most entrepreneurs spend years trying to acquire resources before they start building. Successful entrepreneurs start building with whatever resources they have and let the constraints force them to discover better solutions. The difference isn't about accepting poverty or avoiding growth. It's about understanding that certain types of limitation create psychological and practical advantages that abundance can't replicate. Kaum's story reveals the fourth pillar of millionaire psychology, converting resource limitations into competitive advantages through constraint-driven innovation. But what happens when you face systematic failure across multiple attempts and need to rebuild your psychological approach to risk? In Chapter 5, we'll examine how entrepreneurs program themselves to handle bankruptcy and comeback cycles. Because sometimes the psychology that creates fortunes requires learning to fail systematically while building psychological resilience for inevitable recovery. Chapter 5, The Comeback Code. The Disney Algorithm. Programming yourself for systematic recovery. Here's something that will fundamentally change how you view failure. Walt Disney didn't succeed despite experiencing bankruptcy, nervous breakdowns, and 300+ rejections. He succeeded because he systematically programmed himself to extract competitive advantage from each catastrophic failure. Most people treat failure as evidence they should quit. Millionaires treat failure as curriculum for building psychological resilience that becomes impossible to replicate. December 5, 1901, Chicago, Illinois. Walter Elias Disney is born into a family that will move constantly, struggle financially, and provide early training in adapting to instability. By 1919, Disney has learned to draw, tried multiple jobs, and developed the work ethic that comes from delivering newspapers before dawn for 6 years. His first business venture comes in January 1920. Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists, started with his friend Iwerks. The company fails after 1 month. Most people would return to safe employment. Disney treated this as psychological training for handling business failure, without emotional devastation. In May 1921, Disney incorporates Laugh-O-Gram Films with $15,000 from local investors in Kansas City. The company produces animated shorts that become locally popular. Disney hires talented animators including Hugh Harman, Rudolph Ising, and Iwerks. For a moment, success seems certain. Then the distributor, Pictorial Clubs of Tennessee, pays only a small advance before going bankrupt. The loss of income cripples Laugh-O-Gram financially. Disney is forced to live in his office, bathe weekly at Union Station, and watch his company slide toward bankruptcy. In October 1923, creditors force Laugh-O-Gram into bankruptcy. Disney is 22 years old and officially broke. This is where the Disney algorithm begins. Instead of viewing bankruptcy as personal failure, Disney analyzed it as systematic education in business vulnerabilities. He identified the core problem, relying on a single distributor, and designed his future business model to prevent this specific failure mode. In July 1923, Disney moves to Hollywood with $40 cash, 1 suitcase containing a shirt, 2 pairs of underwear, 2 pairs of socks, and drawing materials. His plan isn't to avoid risk. It's to build systematic resilience for handling inevitable future failures. With his brother Roy, Disney establishes Disney Brothers Studio and secures a contract for Alice Comedies, live action combined with animation. The business grows successfully until 1928, when Disney experiences his second systematic betrayal. Universal Studios steals his character Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and poaches his entire animation team, leaving only Iwerks loyal to Disney. Most entrepreneurs would be devastated. Disney had programmed himself to expect and extract value from betrayal. On a train ride back from the disastrous Universal meeting, Disney creates Mickey Mouse, the character that would define his empire, but the psychological training was just beginning. Disney pitches Mickey Mouse to distributors and is rejected over 300 times. MGM tells him, "Women are afraid of mice," and "it will never sell." Most creators would modify their concept or abandon it entirely. Disney had built psychological immunity to rejection through his previous failures. Instead of changing Mickey Mouse, Disney changes the technology. He adds synchronized sound to create Steamboat Willie in 1928, one of the first cartoons with synchronized sound. The innovation transforms rejection into revolution. But success creates new categories of failure to master. In the early 1930s, Disney suffers what he calls a heck of a breakdown. The pressure of managing a growing studio, the anxiety about whether cartoon shorts could generate serious profits, and the relentless work schedule break his psychological defenses. He experiences sleepless nights, crying spells, and complete inability to focus during story sessions. Instead of treating this breakdown as weakness, Disney systematically studies his psychological limits and designs recovery protocols. He and his wife take an extended second honeymoon down the Mississippi River. Disney returns with a bold new idea, the first full-length animated feature film. The announcement of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs draws industry ridicule. Critics label it Disney's folly, convinced it will destroy his company. The estimated $250,000 budget balloons to $1.5 million due to Disney's perfectionism. He mortgages his home to finance production. In 1937, Snow White becomes the highest-grossing film of its time, earning $8 million and establishing Disney as a serious filmmaker. But psychological resilience means preparing for the next category of failure. The films that follow, Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi, are artistic masterpieces that lose money during initial release. Disney faces his second near bankruptcy. World War II disrupts international markets. In 1941, his animators go on strike, devastating Disney personally because he believed they were like family. Each failure teaches specific psychological skills. The Disney algorithm has 5 components that transform systematic failure into systematic advantage. 1. Failure pattern recognition. Disney studied each failure to identify systemic vulnerabilities rather than personal inadequacies. Distributor bankruptcy taught him about single points of failure. Character theft taught him about intellectual property protection. This pattern recognition prevented similar failures from recurring. 2. Psychological inoculation training. Each rejection, betrayal, and breakdown built immunity to that specific type of emotional damage. After 300 rejections for Mickey Mouse, future rejections became background noise rather than personal attacks. This systematic exposure created unbreakable confidence. 3. Resource optimization under pressure. Bankruptcy forced Disney to extract maximum value from minimal resources. Living in his office and bathing at train stations programmed efficiency obsessions that served him when he had unlimited budgets. Scarcity training created operational discipline that abundance couldn't teach, or strategic innovation through constraint. Every major Disney innovation emerged from systematic failure. Synchronized sound came from Mickey Mouse rejections. Feature-length animation came from cartoon short limitations. Television partnerships came from movie theater distribution challenges. Constraints forced breakthrough thinking. 5. Systematic recovery protocols. Disney developed specific methods for recovering from each type of failure. Business failures required rapid geographic relocation. Creative failures required technological innovation. Personal breakdown required systematic rest and perspective restoration. These protocols made recovery predictable rather than random. The ultimate validation comes with Disneyland. Disney forms WED Enterprises, borrows $50,000 against his life insurance, and sells his second house to finance an entirely new category of entertainment. Opening day on July 17, 1955 becomes Black Sunday. Forged tickets bring unexpected crowds. The new asphalt melts women's heels in 100-degree heat. Drinking fountains don't work due to a plumber's strike, and several rides malfunction. Critics blast the opening as a catastrophic failure. Disney applies his systematic recovery protocols. Instead of defending the problems, he systematically fixes each one and improves operational systems. Disneyland becomes a phenomenal success that spawns a global entertainment empire. Here's how to apply the Disney algorithm to build systematic failure resilience. Step 1. Catalog your failure categories. Document every type of failure you've experienced: financial, professional, creative, personal, health-related. For each category, identify the specific psychological impact and recovery requirements. Build systematic preparation for inevitable future failures. Step 2. Extract systematic lessons. After each failure, conduct formal analysis. What systemic vulnerability did this expose? How can future business models prevent this specific failure mode? What early warning signals should you monitor? Convert emotional experiences into operational intelligence. Step 3. Build psychological inoculation. Deliberately expose yourself to controlled versions of your feared failures. Practice pitching to people who will reject you. Start businesses with limited downside. Take creative risks with defined failure costs. Build immunity through systematic exposure. Step 4. Design recovery protocols. For each failure category, create specific recovery procedures. Financial failure might require rapid cost reduction and new revenue development. Creative failure might require technological innovation or market expansion. Having systematic protocols makes recovery faster and more predictable. Step 5. Convert constraints into innovation. When facing limitations, ask, what breakthrough solution would these constraints force me to discover? Use failure-imposed constraints as innovation requirements rather than obstacles to overcome. Practice this immediately. Identify your most recent significant failure. Instead of analyzing what went wrong emotionally, analyze what systemic vulnerability it exposed and what competitive advantage you could build by developing immunity to this specific failure mode. Example: if a business partnership failed due to poor communication, design systematic communication protocols that become competitive advantages in future partnerships. If a product launch failed due to insufficient market research, develop market validation processes that eliminate this failure mode permanently. The goal isn't to avoid failure. It's to systematically extract maximum educational value from inevitable failures. Here's the controversial truth that makes people uncomfortable. Systematic failure often creates better business leaders than systematic success. Success teaches you how to repeat what worked in specific circumstances. Failure teaches you how to adapt, innovate, and survive in any circumstances. Disney didn't build his empire despite bankruptcy, nervous breakdown, and hundreds of rejections. He built it because these experiences taught him psychological and operational skills that competitors who experienced only success never developed. The companies that survive economic downturns, industry disruptions, and competitive threats aren't typically those that experienced smooth early success. They're run by leaders who have systematically failed, recovered, and built immunity to the categories of failure that destroy unprepared competitors. Most entrepreneurs avoid risk to prevent failure. Successful entrepreneurs strategically engage with controlled failure to build the psychological resilience required for long-term success. The difference isn't about welcoming suffering. It's about understanding that certain types of systematic failure create competitive advantages that can't be developed any other way. Disney's story reveals the fifth pillar of millionaire psychology: converting systematic failure into systematic resilience through strategic recovery protocols. Together, these 5 psychological frameworks, trauma as competitive advantage, voluntary discomfort as psychological conditioning, rejection as data collection, resource limitations as innovation drivers, and failure as resilience training, create the mental operating system that transforms ordinary people into wealth-building machines. The question isn't whether you'll face rejection, resource constraints, and failure. You will. The question is whether you'll treat these experiences as obstacles to overcome or curriculum to master. Here's the final truth that separates those who build fortunes from those who build excuses. Millionaires aren't people who avoided psychological damage. They're people who weaponized it. While you've been reading about Oprah's trauma, Elon's voluntary poverty, Sanders' 1,000 rejections, Coombs' resource scarcity, and Disney's systematic failures, your brain has been making a choice. You're either thinking, "That's inspiring, but my situation is different," or "I can use my current challenges the same way." One of these thoughts builds millionaires. The other builds rationalizations. The psychology of millionaire mindset isn't a theory to understand. It's an operating system to install. Every disadvantage you're currently experiencing, every limitation you're currently accepting, every failure you're currently recovering from is raw material for competitive advantages that your future competitors won't have access to. Your transformation doesn't begin when you get the perfect opportunity, the ideal resources, or the right timing. It begins the moment you stop treating your current circumstances as problems to escape and start treating them as psychological training for the success you claim you want. Most people will finish this book and do nothing. They'll admire these stories, feel momentarily motivated, then return to optimizing for comfort instead of capability. They'll keep waiting for external circumstances to change instead of changing their internal response to those circumstances. But you have a choice right now. You can close this book and continue building a comfortable life, or you can use these psychological frameworks to build an extraordinary one. The difference between those two futures is decided in the next 24 hours by how you respond to whatever challenge you're currently avoiding, whatever failure you're currently recovering from, and whatever limitation you're currently accepting as permanent. The millionaire psychology starts with one simple decision. Will you weaponize your current circumstances, or will you keep making excuses for them? Your answer to that question is your answer to whether you'll join the ranks of those who think like the wealthy, or remain among those who wonder why wealth never comes. The choice is yours. The curriculum is ready. The question is whether you're ready to become the type of person who turns problems into profit, obstacles into opportunities, and psychological damage into competitive advantages. Because that's what millionaires do. That's how millionaires think. And it starts right now.